The saline bag hit the linoleum before anyone moved. It wasn't loud, that was the thing. It just fell, slow and heavy, and the clear fluid spread across the floor like something giving up. The patient in Bay 4 had been waiting 40 minutes. His pressure had been dropping for 20, and the nurse assigned to his room was standing at the medication cart in the hallway, arguing with someone on her phone. Kessler saw it. She always saw it. She picked up the bag. She replaced the line. She didn't say anything because that wasn't her place. Not at Ridgecrest General. Not as the woman they'd hired to count gauze and restock crash carts. She was the supply nurse. That was the word they used. Supply. Like a function. Like a drawer that opened and closed. Jenna Kessler had been at Ridgecrest for 11 months. Before that, she'd spent 8 years as a tactical medic with the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers. She'd flown into places that didn't have names on maps. She'd packed wounds on the side of mountains while rotors beat overhead and men she loved were screaming. She'd held airways open with her bare hands at altitudes where the air itself didn't want to cooperate. She had not listed any of that on her application to Ridgecrest General. Her resume said, Emergency Medical Technician, 2016-2024. Extensive field experience. That was true. It was also the way you translated something that couldn't be translated. How do you explain to a hospital HR department that you once performed a needle decompression in the back of a moving Black Hawk without anesthesia, without a second set of hands, and without losing the patient? You don't. You write extensive field experience, and you hope the question doesn't come up. It didn't come up. They hired her in 6 days. Charge Nurse Bergstrom shook her hand and told her they were glad to have someone with her enthusiasm for nursing. Kessler had smiled. She was good at smiling now. The supply closet on the 3rd floor was hers. That was the way she thought about it, not with pride, but with the flat acceptance of someone who has learned to stop arguing with the terrain. The closet had a metal shelving unit, a rolling cart, 2 clipboards, and a window that looked out onto the parking structure. She kept it organized the way she'd kept her kit in the field. Everything in its place, nothing wasted, nothing left to chance. She knew the inventory by memory. She knew when something had been moved. She knew when someone had pulled supplies without logging them, which happened more often than Bergstrom knew, and more often than Bergstrom would have cared to hear about. In the first 2 months, Kessler had flagged 3 discrepancies in the controlled medication log. Bergstrom had thanked her and said she'd look into it. Nothing changed. Kessler stopped flagging. She learned the rhythms of the floor instead. Which residents came in cocky and burned out by Thursday. Which attendings listened and which ones had already decided before you opened your mouth. Which patients would be ignored longest and needed someone to check on them even when they weren't on her list. Bay 4 was always her first stop, unofficial, before her shift technically started. The nurses on the floor called her quiet. The word they used when they talked about her was sweet. She heard it once in the break room. Dr. Hadley, the senior attending, saying to Bergstrom, "That supply girl is sweet, isn't she?" "Doesn't get in anyone's way," Bergstrom had agreed. Kessler had been standing just outside the door. She'd turned around and gone back to the supply closet and stood in the dark for a moment with her hands flat against the shelving until the feeling passed. She knew what she was. The question was whether this had been a mistake. She'd left the regiment after her 3rd deployment. Not because she couldn't do it anymore. Because something had broken loose inside her during the Quetta extract. A 14-hour operation that went wrong in the 4th hour and kept going wrong in ways that compounded like interest. She'd brought all 4 men home. 2 of them had children who were too young to know what their fathers had almost not come back to. She didn't sleep right for 8 months after that. She tried to go back. Her CO, Major Terence Okafor, a man who had seen her work in conditions that would have folded most people in half, had sat across from her and said, "Kessler, you are one of the best medics I have ever served with, and right now you need to not be here." She'd argued. He'd been patient. In the end, she'd signed the separation paperwork on a Tuesday and driven to her sister's house in Knoxville and slept for 16 hours. The nursing degree had been its own kind of structure. Something to do with her hands, something that had rules and schedules and outcomes she could measure. She'd finished in 14 months accelerated because her field training counted for more credits than the program coordinator had expected. And she'd taken the first job that would have her. Ridgecrest General, Charge Nurse Bergstrom. Supply closet. 3rd floor. She told herself it was fine. Some days it was almost true. The morning that changed everything started the same way all of them did. Kessler clocked in at 6:48. She checked the overnight log, noted 2 discrepancies in the IV fluid count that she added to the running list no one read, and started her first round. The floor was short 2 nurses. Paulson had called in, and someone named Tori was on leave, which meant the remaining staff were stretched and moving fast and not looking at her. She restocked Bay 1 through Bay 3. She replaced a malfunctioning pulse ox cable in Bay 7 because the patient, a 64-year-old man named Walter, who'd been admitted for chest pain, kept triggering false alarms and the nurses kept silencing them without checking. She sat with Walter for 4 minutes while she ran the cable check. He told her about his daughter's wedding in September. She told him the reading looked stable and that she'd make sure someone came by. She found the attending on his way to another room and told him about Walter. Dr. Hadley looked at her the way he always looked at her, polite, briefly, already somewhere else, and said he'd check the chart. She didn't know if he did. She went back to the supply closet. She was logging the cable replacement when Bergstrom appeared in the doorway. Kessler, not a question. A summons. Yes. I need you on the 4th floor this afternoon. They had a cart malfunction and their supply lead is out. Can you cover? She could. She always could. That was the thing about being the person no one thought about. You were available in ways other people weren't, because no one had built you into any plan that mattered. I'll be there at noon, Kessler said. Bergstrom nodded and left. She didn't say thank you. The 4th floor was different. It had a trauma bay, one of 3 in the hospital, and it ran harder and louder than the 3rd. Kessler had covered it twice before, briefly, and both times she had felt something shift in her chest that she didn't have a clean word for. Not nostalgia exactly. Closer to the feeling of hearing a song in another room. She was restocking the trauma bay's secondary cart when she heard the radio. It was clipped to the belt of a nurse she didn't know. Young, maybe 26, moving fast between rooms. The radio crackled once, twice, then a voice came through with a clarity that Ridgecrest's equipment wasn't used to producing. Ridgecrest Tower, this is Night Sun Actual. We have 2 critical casualties inbound. ETA 14 minutes. Be advised, we are requesting specific personnel. Say again, we are requesting specific personnel. Name, Kessler. Jenna Kessler. Tactical designation Ghost Actual. Please confirm presence and route to rooftop LZ. The young nurse stopped walking. Kessler stopped breathing. The radio crackled again. Ridgecrest, please respond. We are requesting Kessler. The young nurse looked around the hallway, uncertain, and her eyes landed on Kessler, because Kessler was the only other person in the corridor who had gone completely still. Do you? The nurse started. That's me, Kessler said. The charge nurse on 4 was a man named Ogilvy. He was broad-shouldered and skeptical, and he'd worked trauma for 19 years. He came out of the nursing station with his arms already crossed before Kessler finished explaining. You're the supply nurse, he said. Not cruelly, just as a statement of established fact. I know what the radio said. I don't have authorization to route non-trauma personnel to the LZ. Those are critical casualties, Kessler said. 14 minutes was 7 minutes ago. Ogilvy looked at her. He had the eyes of a man who had learned to read people in emergency rooms, which meant he was good at it, which meant something in his expression shifted very slightly when he looked at her and didn't find what he expected. You have trauma training, he said. Some, Kessler said. He studied her another 3 seconds. Then he said, roof access is through the stairwell at the end of the hall. I'll have Trauma Bay 1 cleared. She was already moving. The rooftop of Ridgecrest General was not a real landing zone. It had a painted H, a windsock that needed replacing, and no ground crew. Kessler had worked worse. She heard the rotors before she pushed through the door. That sound, the specific texture of it, the way it changed the air, did something to her nervous system that no amount of time behind a supply cart had altered. Her body remembered. It knew exactly what came next. The helicopter came in low from the north, running lights on, no markings she recognized from a distance. It wasn't military exactly. Private contract, she guessed, the kind that ran support operations in places that didn't show up in press releases. It settled onto the H with the precision of a crew that had landed in tighter spots than this. The door opened before the rotors fully stopped. The man who came out first was tall, somewhere in his late 40s, with the kind of face that had been outdoors for most of its life. He was moving fast, and his eyes went straight to her, and he stopped. Ghost, he said. It wasn't a question. Who are you, she said. Warrant Officer Deacon Rourke. 160th, retired. 19 months ago I would have said your name to 6 different people before I remembered you were out. Who are your casualties? 2. 1 GSW to the upper right quadrant through and through. Pressure's been stable, but he lost more than we'd like. Second one is a traumatic pneumo. We did needle decom in the air, left side holding for now, but he needs a chest tube yesterday. Kessler was already moving toward the helicopter. Blood type? A positive on the GSW. O-neg on the pneumo, age? 28 and 31. She looked at the second man out of the helicopter, shorter, quieter, watching her with an expression she recognized as the look people gave you when they had been told something and were now waiting to see if it was true. How'd you find me? She said, not stopping. Rourke kept pace beside her. Major Okafor. He still tracks the people worth tracking. She didn't say anything to that. What happened in Trauma Bay 1 over the next 52 minutes was not something Kessler had planned for. She hadn't planned for any of it. She had plans for supply inventories and shift coverage, and the quietly managed life she had built inside a set of walls that didn't ask much of her. She had not planned for Dr. Hadley to walk into the trauma bay 12 minutes in and stop in the doorway. She had the chest tube in by then, clean, fast, the way she'd been taught in conditions where there was no option for not clean and not fast. The patient's O2 had come up 8 points in 4 minutes. His color was better. The resident who'd been standing at the cart, a young woman named Chu who Kessler had seen twice in the break room and never in a trauma, was moving with her now, quick and competent, following Kessler's instructions with the focused energy of someone who understood they were in the presence of something different. Hadley stood in the doorway. Kessler didn't look at him. Who authorized? He started. Ogilvy, Kessler said, not looking up. Chest tube is seated. I need the second unit of ONEG, and I need it now, Dr. Chu. Chu moved. Hadley did not move. He stood in the doorway with his mouth slightly open and the expression of a man whose categories had just rearranged themselves without his permission. Bergstrom arrived 4 minutes later. She stood beside Hadley. Together they watched. Kessler didn't notice them exactly. She noticed everything in the room that mattered. The patient's pressure coming up, the breath sounds improving, Rourke standing against the far wall with his arms at his sides and something in his posture that looked, if you knew what to look for, like relief, and the two people in the doorway were not in that category. Not yet. Both patients stabilized. The GSW went to surgery without incident. The pneumo was breathing on his own by the time they moved him to the ICU, and he grabbed Kessler's wrist as they transferred him and said something she couldn't quite hear, and then said it again louder. Thank you. She squeezed his hand once and let go. In the hallway outside the bay, Rourke stopped her. We didn't know you were here, he said. We pulled your file from the state licensing database when we lost our on-call medic 2 weeks ago. We've been trying to reach you. The number we had, Kessler said. I know. He was quiet for a moment. Okafor said you needed time. Okafor was right. Is it enough time? She didn't answer that immediately. She looked down the hallway, at the nurses moving between rooms, at the supply cart she'd left against the wall by the stairwell, at the fluorescent lights that had the particular quality of fluorescent lights everywhere, which was the quality of something that never quite stopped humming. I don't know, she said. That's honest, Rourke said. Bergstrom found her in the supply closet 20 minutes later. Third floor, where Kessler had gone to finish logging the morning inventory because it still needed to be done. The closet was the same as it always was. The shelves were straight. The clipboards were where she'd left them. Bergstrom stood in the doorway for a moment before she spoke. I didn't know, she said. Kessler didn't turn around. I know your application, it didn't say. I know what my application said. Another silence. Bergstrom was not a bad person. Kessler had known that for a while. She was a person operating inside a system that rewarded not looking too closely at things that didn't fit the existing structure, and she had done what that system trained people to do. That wasn't the same as being bad. It was its own kind of problem, but it wasn't the same. Dr. Hadley wants to talk to you, Bergstrom said. I'm sure he does. Ogilvy, too, he said. Bergstrom paused. He said he wants to know what it would take. Kessler turned around then. Bergstrom's expression was harder to read than Kessler expected. There was discomfort in it, yes, and something that might have been embarrassment, but there was also something else. Something that looked, if she was being fair about it, like genuine uncertainty. Like a person who had just realized the frame they'd been using to look at something was the wrong size. What would take? Kessler said. To move you to trauma, officially. Kessler looked at her for a long moment. The supply closet hummed its fluorescent hum. Outside the window, the parking structure stood gray and still. Let me think about it, Kessler said. It wasn't yes, it wasn't no. It was the truest thing she'd said out loud in 11 months. That night she drove home the long way, past the reservoir where she'd taken to running in the early mornings when the road was empty and the light was still blue, and the only sound was her own breathing, and the occasional sound of something moving in the tree line. She didn't stop. She just drove past it and thought about Major Okafor, who had watched her leave and still kept track of her from a distance, which was a kind of loyalty she didn't have a word for yet. She thought about the patient on the roof, his color coming back, his breath coming back. She thought about Dr. Chu, who had moved fast and well, and looked at her not with deference but with the sharp attention of someone who wanted to understand. She thought about Walter on the 3rd floor, chest pain, daughter's wedding in September. She hadn't been wrong to come here. That was the thing she hadn't been certain of, not until now. She hadn't been wrong to need something quieter. The Quetta extract had taken something from her, and she'd needed to stop moving long enough to find out what was left. Here was what was left. She could still put a chest tube in clean. She could still read a room faster than most people in it. She could still make the call that needed making when the person who was supposed to make it didn't. That wasn't nothing. She pulled into her driveway and sat in the car for a while with the engine off. The neighborhood was quiet. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking at something and then stopped. She thought about what Rourke had asked her. Is it enough time? She didn't know if it was. She didn't know if that was even the right question. Maybe the question wasn't about time at all. Maybe it was about whether she was willing to stop apologizing for what she knew how to do. She got out of the car. She went inside. She sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop and found the email from Major Okafor, 3 weeks old, sitting in a folder she hadn't opened, and she read it all the way through for the first time. At the bottom he had written, "When you're ready, no timeline. Just wanted you to know the door doesn't close." She read that line 3 times. Then she opened a new message and started typing. She didn't know exactly what she was going to say. She knew it was going to be short. She knew it was going to be honest. She knew that somewhere across the city, 2 men were breathing in a way they might not have been breathing if the radio had reached a different hallway, a different floor, a different person standing still in a corridor while everyone else moved. Ghost, they had called her. She had let them. Maybe it was time to let herself be called something else.